My wife cheated with her ex, and they planned to steal my $500K company. But when the judge read the documents, she and her lover were left speechless. I'm 35 years old. I run a tech consulting company that I built from scratch. And 6 months ago, I discovered that my wife was cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend while they were plotting how to take half my business in a divorce. The thing is, when I married Natalie 2 years ago, I never imagined I'd end up in such a dirty legal battle. But here we are, and I need to tell this story because I still can't believe how things turned out in the end. It all started about 10 years ago, when I decided to leave my boring corporate job and launch my own tech consulting firm. It was tough at first. You know, the typical entrepreneur stories where you eat ramen every day and work until 3 in the morning. But little by little, I started getting clients, building reputation, and after about 5 years, the business really took off. By the time I turned 33, I was generating pretty good income, had a small but solid team, and basically lived comfortably, but I wasn't a millionaire or anything like that. Let's say I was doing well. I met Natalie at a business conference where she worked in public relations for a mid-sized firm, and honestly, I thought she was incredible from the first moment. Smart, beautiful, with that kind of personality that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room when she talks to you, you know what I mean? We dated for almost a year before getting married, and everything seemed perfect. I mean, we had chemistry, shared interests, talked about building a life together, all those things you want to hear when you're in love. When we got married, Natalie decided to leave her PR job because, according to her, she wanted to focus on supporting my business and eventually start her own project, which seemed reasonable to me at the time. I was making enough for both of us, and I thought it would be nice to have that kind of dynamic where she could explore her options without the pressure of a 9-to-5 job. The first months of marriage were good. Normal, I guess. Although looking back, I should have noticed some weird signs, like she never really got involved in my business, despite saying she would. And she didn't make much progress on that personal project she mentioned so much either. But well, I was busy with contracts and clients, traveling quite a bit for meetings, and honestly, I didn't pay much attention to those things because I trusted her completely. Now, here's where I need to pause to explain something important that turned out to be crucial later. When I started my business, my mother, Linda, who is a pretty smart woman in financial and legal matters, suggested I put the company in her name for asset protection reasons and some tax advantages that I'm not going to go into detail about because I'm not an accountant. But basically, it was a completely legitimate legal strategy where I managed the business, made all the decisions, received the salary and benefits, but on paper the registered owner was her. My mother never interfered in anything operational. She literally only signed papers when necessary and kept everything in order from the administrative side, and this structure had been in place since year 2 or 3 of the business, long before I met Natalie. I mentioned it to Natalie at some point when we were dating, like casually in a conversation about family finances, but honestly, I don't think she paid much attention or understood the legal implications of what that meant. And I didn't make a big deal about it either because for me it was just the way my business had always worked. So, after being married for about a year and a half, I started noticing that Natalie was acting weird. Distant is the word I would use. Like her mind was somewhere else every time we talked. She spent a lot of time on her phone, went out frequently with friends that I never really got to know well, and in general, there was less connection between us, you know? Sex practically disappeared. Conversations became superficial. And when I tried to ask her if everything was okay, she always told me, yes, that she was just stressed or tired or whatever. I thought maybe she was going through something personal. Maybe she felt frustrated about not having advanced in her career or project, and I tried to be understanding and give her space. But the distance kept growing, and honestly, I was starting to seriously worry about our marriage. Then came the day that changed everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember perfectly because I had canceled a meeting to work from home, and Natalie had gone out supposedly to have lunch with a friend. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, which wasn't unusual because sometimes she left it there when she went out quickly. But this time, I saw she had a message window open and, I don't know, something made me look. I'm not one of those people who checks their partner's phones or computers. Honestly, I always thought that was invasive and toxic, but at that moment, something in my instinct told me to look, and I did. The messages were between her and someone named Austin, and I didn't need to read more than 3 lines to realize I was looking at a conversation between my wife and her ex-boyfriend, with whom she had apparently been having an affair for months. My hands started trembling as I read, because it wasn't just the typical affair where 2 people fall in love and make a mistake. No, this was calculated and cold in a way that turned my stomach. The messages went back about 4 or 5 months, and the kind of things they said were intimate, obviously, but what really destroyed me was finding conversations where they were literally planning our divorce. Natalie wrote to Austin things like, "When I divorce him, I'm going to get at least half of everything, and his business is worth a lot. My lawyer says I'm entitled to half because I left my career for him, and Austin responded with things like, "Almost there, babe. Soon you'll be free and with enough money for us to start our life together." There were messages where they discussed how much they thought my company was worth, how Natalie was going to play the role of sacrificing wife who gave up everything for her husband, strategies to maximize what she could get from the divorce, and even conversations about properties they wanted to buy together with my money after the divorce. I sat there reading for I don't know how long, probably about an hour, going through the entire message history and feeling sicker and sicker. There were photos she sent him, plans they made to see each other when I was traveling, messages from after sleeping together talking about how much they missed each other, and the worst part was the coldness with which they talked about me, as if I were just an obstacle or a bank account they were waiting to be able to drain, on hopes that Natalie would get this big financial score from the divorce. I read a message where he told her, "Make sure to document everything you do for him and the house. That's going to help in court." And she responded, "I'm already doing it. I have photos and everything." Like, she was literally setting me up while I worked and trusted her completely. When Natalie got home that afternoon, I had already made several decisions. First, I had taken screenshots of absolutely everything, saved copies in multiple places, and sent everything to my personal email. Second, I had called my mother to warn her that complicated legal times were probably coming, and she needed to have all the business documentation in order. Third, I had contacted a divorce lawyer that a friend recommended, and I already had an appointment for the next day. And fourth, I had decided I was going to confront her, but without showing all my cards yet, because I wanted to see how far she was capable of going with her lies. When she walked through the door with her normal face, smiling and asking me how my day had been, I felt a mix of disgust and rage that I could barely control. I told her, "We need to talk," and she immediately put on a worried face like, "What happened, honey?" as if she really cared. I sat across from her in the living room and asked her directly, "Who is Austin?" The look on her face was pure panic. Her eyes opened wide, and she stammered something about him being just a friend from before. But I cut her off and told her I already knew everything, that I had read the messages, that I knew about the affair and about their plans for the divorce. For a second, I thought she was going to deny everything, but I guess she realized there was no point, so the mask fell off completely. She stood up and told me, with a coldness I had never seen in her, that yes, she was with Austin, that she was going to ask me for a divorce anyway, and that she deserved half of everything because she had sacrificed her career for me. I told her that she had chosen to leave her job, that I never asked her to do it, and she yelled something about how I didn't understand the sacrifice she had made, that 2 years of her life building our home deserved compensation. I laughed, and it wasn't a happy laugh, but more like a, "I can't believe this is happening" laugh. And I told her, "Go ahead, ask for the divorce," that it was going to be interesting to see how it all turned out. She looked at me confused and asked what I meant by that, and I simply told her she'd see that things weren't as simple as she and her little boyfriend thought. That night, Natalie slept in the guest room, and the next day she went straight to a lawyer to start the divorce papers. I went to my appointment with my attorney, a guy named Richard, who had like 20 years of experience in complicated divorces, and I showed him everything, the messages, the screenshots, the plans they had made. Richard laughed when he saw the part where they calculated how much they were going to get from my business, and he told me they're in for a surprise. I explained the whole situation about the company being in my mother's name, and he verified all the documents and confirmed that legally Natalie had no rights to the business because it was never marital property, since the ownership structure was established years before the marriage, and she never had any operational or financial role in the company. Technically, I was a well-paid employee of a company that belonged to another person, even though that person was my mother and the business functionally operated as mine in practice. The following weeks were tense, but also kind of funny in retrospect. Natalie was still living in the house because legally I couldn't kick her out until the divorce was in process, and she basically avoided me completely while spending hours in her room talking on the phone, I guess with Austin and her lawyer. I kept working normally, managing my clients and projects, but with this dark cloud over everything. Several of our mutual friends started contacting me, asking what had happened because Natalie was apparently already spreading her version of the story, where she was the victim and I was the villain who didn't value her, which made me pretty angry, but my lawyer told me to keep my mouth shut and let things develop in court. Finally, the first mediation session arrived, which is like a step before going to full court where both parties try to reach an agreement. Natalie arrived with her lawyer, a woman who looked very confident and who immediately started with the speech that her client had sacrificed her professional career, that she had dedicated 2 years to supporting my success, and that she deserved fair compensation that included half the value of my consulting company plus a considerable amount of alimony. I was sitting there with Richard, who let Natalie's lawyer finish her complete speech before saying, "Interesting position, but there's a small detail I think you haven't considered." Natalie's face. When Richard started explaining that the business legally belonged to my mother was something I'll never forget. She went from confident to confused to completely pale in a matter of seconds. Her lawyer asked to see the documentation, and Richard had everything perfectly organized, incorporation certificates, tax records, documents showing that my mother had been the registered owner since year 2 of the business, years before I met Natalie. The lawyer started asking questions like, "But he manages the business," and "But he receives income from the business," and Richard patiently explained that yes, I was an employee with a generous salary and bonuses, but that didn't make the business marital property, especially given that the structure existed pre-marriage, and Natalie had never contributed operationally or financially to the company. But there was a long, tense silence, and I could see Natalie whispering urgent things to her lawyer, probably asking how it was possible they hadn't discovered this before. The mediation basically stopped there because they needed time to review the information and consult with experts about the legal situation. We left there, and I felt, honestly, victorious, but also exhausted because I knew this wasn't over and that Natalie wasn't going to give up easily. And I was right, because after that mediation, things got really ugly. Natalie launched a complete social media campaign, painting me as an abusive manipulator who was hiding money to avoid giving her what she deserved, and several acquaintances who didn't know the whole story started seeing me differently. She posted vague things, but obviously about me, like, when you discover the person you trusted is capable of anything to protect their money, and women who sacrifice everything for their partners always end up betrayed. And although she never mentioned my name directly, I knew who she was talking about. Mutual friends asked me if it was true that I had hidden assets or manipulated legal documents to leave her with nothing. And I had to explain over and over again the real story, although my lawyer told me not to say much publicly. The legal process dragged on for months because Natalie's lawyer kept looking for angles. They requested complete financial audits of the business. I tried to argue that my mother was just a nominal figure and that I was the real owner, and even tried to bring my mother into the legal process as a defendant, which really made me angry because my mom had nothing to do with the drama between Natalie and me. She had just been smart years ago in structuring the business in a protected way. Every motion, every document, every hearing was a tremendous emotional and financial drain, and there were days where I thought, why did I marry this person? And felt stupid for not having seen the red flags earlier. Finally, after about 5 months of legal battle, we got to court. The judge was an older man who looked like he had seen thousands of similar divorces, and for 2 days he listened to arguments from both sides. Natalie's lawyer did everything possible to paint her as a devoted wife who had sacrificed everything, brought evidence of things she had supposedly done for me, photos of networking events where she had accompanied me, receipts for household expenses she had managed, and testimonies from acquaintances who said she always talked about supporting my career. Richard, on his side, presented the messages between Natalie and Austin, the divorce plans they had made months before, and all the legal documentation showing that the business had never been marital property and that Natalie had never had any real role in the company. The judge asked several specific questions about the timeline, when the ownership structure of the business was established, if Natalie ever worked in the company, if she contributed, financially in any way, and every answer confirmed that no, she had no legitimate claim to the business. He also asked Natalie directly about the messages with Austin and about their plans for the divorce, and she tried to minimize it, saying she was angry and frustrated when she wrote those things. But the judge didn't seem convinced. When the time came for the verdict, he basically said he understood that divorces are difficult situations, but that the law was clear. The business was not marital property because it pre-existed the marriage under another ownership structure. Natalie had not contributed to the business in a substantial way, and therefore she had no right to claim half the value of the company. He awarded Natalie a modest sum as a settlement, basically a percentage of the savings we had accumulated during the marriage that were technically mine, but that the judge considered reasonable to divide, plus no alimony because our marriage only lasted 2 years, and she was perfectly capable of working. The total amount was like the equivalent of 1 year of her previous PR salary. I mean, it was nothing compared to what she and Austin had been planning to get. When the judge finished reading his decision, Natalie started crying right there in court, and Austin, who had come to support her, looked completely defeated. I just sat there processing everything, feeling relieved and exhausted at the same time. I left that courthouse about 3 months ago. The divorce papers were finalized 6 weeks ago, and honestly, I'm still processing everything that happened. Natalie moved in with Austin to an apartment in another part of the city. And as far as I know, he's still unemployed and she's looking to get back into the public relations world, although it probably won't be easy after being out for 2 years. Some mutual friends still avoid me because they believe her version of the story, but the ones who really know me and saw the evidence know the truth, and that's what matters, I guess. My business is fine, actually better than ever, because during all this drama, I obsessively focused on work to keep from going crazy, and we got several big contracts that have been very successful. My relationship with my mother is stronger than ever, and she tells me she warned me that she had a bad feeling about Natalie from the beginning, but didn't want to say anything to not interfere. And I thank her every day for being so smart with the business structure, because it literally saved me from losing years of hard work. But did I learn anything from all this? Honestly, I don't know if learned is the right word, but I'm definitely more cautious with people now, more aware that people can have hidden agendas, and more grateful to have family that protects me even when I don't know I need protection. Sometimes, I wonder if there were signs I ignored at the beginning with Natalie, if I was blind from being in love. But I also tell myself, you can't live your life assuming everyone is going to betray you. The other day, a client asked me if I would get married again someday, and honestly, I don't know the answer. Maybe eventually, but definitely not soon, and definitely with a well-detailed prenuptial agreement. For now, I'm fine alone, focusing on my work, rebuilding my social life, and trying not to be cynical about relationships, although it's hard after something like this. What I do know is that I came out of this better than I could have, thanks to my mother and decisions that were made years ago without knowing they would someday be so important. And although the process was horrible and draining and made me feel betrayed in a way I had never experienced, at least I can say justice worked this time, that Natalie didn't get what she was looking for, and that I'm free to move forward without someone who clearly never really loved me, only loved what she thought she could get from me.